What the Tech is brought to you by Text Expander. Text Expander helps you communicate smarter. Visit textexpander.com/podcast for 20% off your first year. Everybody, welcome to What the Tech. I'm Andrew Zarian, joined by Mr. Paul Thurrott on a very special edition of What the Tech. How you doing, Paul?
Very auspicious occasion.
Yes. It was Wwdc 2020. Apple did their annual developer conference. It kicked it off today. It started at around 1 o'clock East, just finished. A lot of information from this year's WWDC. Obviously, it wasn't the traditional WWDC that we see with the clapping and the cheering and the pauses and the breaks and a musical performance. Bono didn't come out on stage. Yeah.
Didn't miss the clapping. Did not miss
the clapping.
I hope that's not lost on these guys, you know?
Oh, no, totally lost on them. I guarantee they're just thinking, man, clapping, imagine that reaction we would have gotten when we said everybody's copying us.
Oh, by the way, who were they talking about?
I don't know.
That was the strangest part of that presentation. He said, a lot of our competitors are copying the way we name things. And I mean this seriously. I literally have no idea what company he's talking about.
Well, I have breaking news. It's Microsoft, right? The next version of Microsoft, you could confirm this, is called Rancho Cucamonga.
but no, it isn't. And then, I mean, who's left? It's like Google? Are you talking about like Linux guys? I mean, what?
Know.
I don't.
I took it as.
Is there another company naming betas or products after place names in California? Intel uses locations in Oregon, or at least they used to. I don't know.
I guess
they always did.
Yeah, they do.
Long before Apple did that. I mean, what are they talking about?
Samsung, maybe? What is Samsung doing?
I mean it honestly. I have no idea what they meant by that.
So I honestly, when I listened to it, I thought we're going to run down this whole thing, guys. There's a lot to unpack here, and by the way, today I want to see the chat room. I want to see what you guys think of this because there's a lot of stuff to kind of absorb in today's announcement. Process. There you go. That's the word. Yeah. But when I heard him mention that the competitors, they've had to keep the secret because competitors, I thought they were talking about the operating system. I didn't think they were talking about the name.
That was just weird.
It's fine. Guys, we do have a lot to talk about. Obviously, we're using Thurrott.com as a point of reference today. A lot of great articles up there already. Brad has been on fire, already posted some stuff. Paul has some stuff. We're going to be on Thurrott.com using that as a point of reference. And obviously, just running down the list of topics here as we unpack WWDC 2020. I want to remind everybody, if you're watching live on YouTube, you could hit that subscribe button. We're also available everywhere podcasts are available. Let's hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the show. First time listening, welcome in. This is a very different type of tech show where we kind of have fun with technology. I always pride the show as we're having fun talking about tech. So let's begin this. Paul, where do you want to start with this event? Very different WWDC.
If you don't mind.
Yeah.
I'd kind of like to start with the Mac stuff.
Okay.
Specifically the ARM, well, they don't call it the Apple Silicon angle. Just because to me, this was the most highly anticipated part of the show and is something I'm trying to come to grips with because unlike most people probably, I have very closely followed Microsoft's attempts to do the same thing not exactly the same thing, I should say, to do something very similar in Windows. And I got to be honest, Microsoft has not done a great job with a similar transition. So I'm fascinated by this aspect of it.
Yeah. So let's go into it. So that was I guess that was a one more thing moment, right, for this conference where at the end of the conference, they're talking about macOS, obviously, and they're going through all the feature changes and everything. UI change tweaks, feature changes, app updates. They spent a lot of time on iMessage this year. And at the end, they announced that they are going with their own chips, Apple Silicon, which they mentioned about 500 times. You know what that reminds me of? When they called it an internet communicator.
Yes.
It's almost like
and no one knew what they meant.
And nobody knew what they meant. Can you imagine what people like, what the hell is an Apple Silicon that really are not in the know right now?
Yeah. So obviously they can't call it ARM, right? The A series chips that Apple makes now, which it bought a company that was making the chips, but they have evolved that stuff dramatically.
Yeah.
Um, there's no good name for it, right? So it is Apple Silicon. I mean, it's kind of a goof. Silicon is a strange word, but they can't call it ARM. It's Windows 10 on ARM, unless you Qualcomm, by the way, because Qualcomm refers to it as Windows 10 on Snapdragon, but the official name is Windows 10 on ARM. And look, give Apple some credit. I mean, they're not going to call it's not macOS something. It's not, it's just going to be Mac. It's the computers are going to be Mac. The system's going to be Mac OS. It's just that they're shifting the underlying platform, and if it works out the way it looks like it's going to, most people aren't going to have any problems.
Yeah,
and that's the killer.
well,
I mean,
Well, here's the thing that we don't know. I mean, what we do know is
there's
that
a lot we don't know for sure. But
what we do know is that the developer version of this will be shipping as a Mac Mini, and it's using the 12. What is it? The 12Z processor.
Yep. Which I think they already are shipping. Isn't that the thing that's in the latest iPad Pro?
Yeah.
12Z. It was just in fact, if I remember, if you're, I'm not a Mac, like an Apple expert, but I believe the difference between the 12X, which was in the previous generation Mac iPad Pro, and the 12Z is just that the 12Zs are X's that meet a certain performance threshold. Sometimes the way that chips yield, some of them are a little faster than others. And I mean, it's kind of an artificial thing.
By the way.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, sometimes it's like you have a baby, and sometimes it's an i5, and sometimes it's an i7. Yeah.
Just decide which one you want.
It's not science, guys. This is imprecise. It's magic.
It's magical.
No, that's true. That's the way chipsets yield. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing, but
so just if people don't know what the specs are of this for the developers, obviously this is not going to be the shipped processor in the MacBooks.
Right.
This is for development
reasons.
Which,
by the way, but that itself, I think, is very important because these people who get these things are going to leak, or I probably won't be able to talk about it specifically, but we're going to find out what the performance is like. And one of the things I've always said about this is, Mac OS is a very different system than iOS or iPad OS. And a lot of the performance stuff that Apple's been touting and its fans have been touting is kind of an unknown because we don't know what that system is like when you run a real OS on it. Well, now we're going to know. And we're going to know on the exact same hardware. Well, no, that's not true. The exact same processor, that SoC system on a chip,
what is capable
that it uses in its iPads, right?
Yeah.
That's actually really interesting because in the future, I don't think that will always be the case or that it will ever be the case. I think, like they said, because they said this, there's going to be a family of these things.
Yeah.
Some will go on the phones, some will go on the iPads. Some of the ones from the iPads might go on the low-end Macs, but there'll be a family of them on the Mac, and the Mac versions will have higher power, probably worse battery life, and better GPUs, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just fascinating, when this comes out.
So here's the interesting thing, right? I mean, we're going to kind of retouch on what you're saying. We're going to find out what you could actually do on an iPad. When you look at these chips, because you got to also remember, they never talk about the specs of these chips, right? Like, I don't think anybody knows that the A12Z is an 8-core processor that's 2.5 gigahertz. Okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Nobody knows about this.
It doesn't matter because today, you can't look at a list of numbers like that and then look at a list of numbers for an Intel or an A and B processor and say that these things line up in some way. You can't.
Yeah.
Here's what we do know. When you take a Qualcomm ARM processor and you stick it in a PC, and all you do is kind of recompile the system to, run on that system, it runs terrible. It's awful.
How great does that work, Paul?
And it's not very good. And if you run emulated and only 32-bit apps, that runs like crap. It's molasses. It's terrible. So, what we've learned on the Windows side of the fence is that these chipsets need to be modified to run that software more effectively. And as you do that, the more you do it, you get a little closer to what people expect. You lose a lot of battery life, and then you still have these lingering compatibility issues. 64-bit apps are a problem on Windows. They don't work. And all drivers do not work. That's a huge problem. Those are two things that Apple is not going to have a problem with. And those are huge advantages.
Well, emulation is going to be a problem also.
Well, that's the question. So you can't take everything that Apple says at a press event at face value. I mean, it is very important in the very beginning when we hear from the people of those developer boxes, they'll run Microsoft Office as it exists today on that system and see what that looks like. Maybe it runs like crap. But they talk a good game. And by the way, they do have a rich history of making these transitions work. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see.
So here's some of the questions that I have. One, so they made a very good point at the end of the event, the thing.
Yep.
The thing.
Yep.
At the end of WWDC that this is not bye-bye to Intel, especially now. They're going to support Intel devices for a while. They have more Intel-based chips devices coming out in the next year or two. Now we're talking about a very different discussion, right? We know how this is going to perform on a MacBook Air, right? I get it. It'll run great. Your battery life, you'll have 400 hours of battery life on this thing. You can take this thing, you'll never have to charge again. But how's this going to compare to the top-tier i9 MacBook Pro?
Right. So in the beginning, probably not too good. But, what they were talking about was we're going to get there. And they did talk about a 2-year transition. And so that means we're entering into a little bit of a dicey area, in the short term. Because first of all, we have to see what it really looks like today. So in 6 months from now or 9 months from now or 12 months from now, whatever it is, when you're choosing to buy a Mac, you're going to make this consideration based on your needs. And yeah, I mean, for a college student, not just coming semester, but a year from now, a MacBook Air running one of these chips might be the best choice because it will run all day and they can go to school and that'll be great. Someone who wants a workstation today, does video processing, that kind of thing, you're probably going to want to go with an Intel for the short term, but they showed that stuff off. See, that's the thing. I remember we talked about this. There was a spectrum of possibilities from literally we're only going to run new apps or recompiled apps. We're not even going to try to do emulation, all the way up to, we're switching the entire product line over. They went to that end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And that is a shot across the bow of Microsoft and Qualcomm because, and this is, maybe one of those little nuances people don't think about at all or only a little bit, if ever, is Microsoft is not transitioning to ARM. What they're doing is offering ARM as another option. And in the Microsoft world, the Windows 10 on ARM systems that we see so far are thin and light devices. They're not inexpensive. They're not cheap devices because, frankly, the Qualcomm hardware was actually pretty expensive. So they're kind of what we would call like executive class devices. So they're kind of real thin, light. They're usually kind of 2-in-1. It's a Windows PC, so we flip them around, they turn them into tablets and all that stuff. But they're fairly expensive, and the performance is still not great. And it still has all those compatibility issues. So it's really limited. But at least the message on that side is, well, you have a choice. I mean, look, if you need to run Photoshop or something, you buy a real computer, you'll be fine. On the Apple side, they are literally leaving Intel behind. Now, it's going to take years, but that's the message. Like, they're leaving Intel.
So, here's a great question, right? So we're doing a show live, obviously, right after the event. Somebody said in the chat room, says, listen, and he has a serious question. He was looking to buy a new MacBook Pro. Does he buy one now?
Yep. Yeah, you do.
I said,
if you are buying a MacBook Pro, don't even think about that. You'll be fine. You want the Intel version. That's the one that's going to be nice. Yeah. The other thing is, look, I mean, this whatever the first system is, and there'll probably be 2 of them. Not until the end of the year. I mean, if you need a computer, you just get a computer. You don't have to worry about this. This transition doesn't stop. These universal apps, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5, 6, whatever years, the developers are still going to compile their apps to a universal format. They're always going to work on Intel. It doesn't go away. I mean, eventually it does, but many years down the line for that kind of thing. So there's no worries for compatibility, performance, etc. Every Mac app is going to keep running on your system. It doesn't just stop one day, one day soon. So yeah, I think that's, well, I mean, so in one of the world's weirdest coincidences, I woke up this morning. I knew this event was happening, obviously, going through my news feed. Usually I'm kind of annoyed by this kind of thing because one of the things I see in my news feed are things that are not news items necessarily, but are like sponsored links to stuff for sale. But in this case, I guess it wasn't sponsored, but some Mac site was like, hey, Apple has finally put the 2020 MacBook Air in the refurbished store for like $150 off per model. And oddly enough, I've been looking to buy something on the Mac side because I need something for the developer stuff. And I hate spending money on Apple hardware. I don't want to buy something new. It's not something I'm going to use day to day, every day as my main machine. I just need it because I have to run Xcode. And I realize a MacBook Air is not the ideal system for this, but who cares? It's like, it's just a side thing. I don't care if it takes a little longer to compile. So like literally today, I bought a MacBook Air. So yeah, knowing that this was coming, because let's face it, I mean, 6 months from now, a year from now, if you were a developer or someone who was a power user in any way and wanted kind of a MacBook Pro class experience, you're still going to get an Intel chip. You know, it's the right way to go.
So I have so many questions here, and I want to present this in a way that, it makes sense. So right now, they've obviously, this is the introduction, right? This is how they introduce this chip to the public, to the developers. The biggest pro here is going to be for the developers, right? It's going to be a seamless transition from device to device, whether it's an iPhone, an iPad, or Mac OS. You're going to want to have your applications everywhere, essentially. You don't want to cut one out. You're going to want to scale everything to that device. How quickly will developers say, you know what, this is the future of the Mac? We have to have our apps there.
Well, so part of today's announcement was and I think you were talking to someone about this when I signed in, it's kind of the iPadification of the macOS user experience, right? So the macOS dock, the desktop, everything, it's going to look more like the iPad. And I think part of that is to ease this transition of the apps, because the big benefit here is going to be iPad apps coming to the Mac, which is something, Apple's been working on for a couple of years now, right? And so the first year they had a handful of Apple apps. The second year they had a couple more, and they allowed third-party support. So here we are entering year 3. It was a Catalyst announcement. That's the name of the technology that they use for this. But I think that, and they said something that I speculated on. They confirmed something I speculated, which was that in moving to the ARM platform, to the Apple Silicon platform, iPad apps can essentially run natively now, right? So they're not going to be emulated anymore. So the performance will be better. And in evolving Catalyst, they're going to have more facilities for developers to make those apps seem more native and have more native macOS features when run on the Mac. And those things are all important. So, Apple kind of did it, and they did it in a couple of years. But the reality is we haven't seen a wellspring of Catalyst apps yet, and it hasn't been super important. But I think maybe with this year 3, or for third-party developers this year 2, that stuff can finally start to happen. Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah. I'm very curious how they actually release the hardware, because that's going to be the big story here, right? Like, they can talk about this all they want, but they have to be very careful. So they're saying by the end of the year, I'm imagining that fall announcement is going to have a ARM-based Mac in the lineup. Which Mac do you do it with? I mean, do you just jump head first and say, listen, we have an option on every line? You could have a MacBook Pro with this. You could have a MacBook Air with this.
Yeah. I mean, you and I and others had speculated earlier, the logical way to go would be you start with the MacBook. You bring it back.
Yeah.
Or maybe you have a MacBook Air, credible rumors, and by credible, I mean, they come from a credible source. I think Kuo or somebody said that Apple was going to release 2 ARM-based Macs this fall, and they were kind of they were both unexpected.
13-inch MacBook Pro.
And a MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
So that's not the way I would have done it. I mean, if I was going to go Mac desktop, I probably would have done the Mac Mini, and I would have done a MacBook or a MacBook Air. But, I don't run Apple, obviously, so who cares what I would do? But then you get into the situation where on the Mac, on both of those systems, you're going to have Apple and Intel versions of the same design, aren't you? It seems like you are. They're not going to get rid of the, they're not going to get rid of the Intel version of the MacBook Pro, right? I mean,
see, I don't. That is a marketing nightmare.
Yep. Yeah,
I know that their point is everything is going to work. Don't worry about it. It's not like on the Windows side where an ARM-based Windows machine will not do what the Intel-based one does. I get that. I get that that's what they're selling. But if I'm walking into a store and I'm paying, what are you going to pay for this ARM-based MacBook?
Oh, it's not going to be cheap. So that's the thing. It's not going to be cheaper. But that's not what you're getting. So I wonder, you notice the dev system was 16 gigs of RAM. I'm wondering if on ARM, especially on the Pro devices, if 16 becomes the base on the RAM instead of 8, because of the processor, right? Maybe that helps.
What are they now? Is it 16 or is it still 8?
No, you can get 8. Am I right about that? Yeah, I think the base. Right. Yeah, I think so. But whatever. We can sit here and speculate all day long. But one of the big advantages that Apple has is its user base, and these guys are a lot more accepting, and they go in very clear-headed about what they're doing. Like a consumer who buys an Apple Silicon-based iMac or something, typically, is going to know what they're doing. They know what they know what the trade-off is, and by that time, we'll know, how it works. The problem that Microsoft has always faced is that its user base is less educated. I don't mean that didn't go to college. I mean, they're less educated about the technology and the products. They probably don't feel as strongly about the brand, and that's the problem with Windows 10s mess mode and RT back in the day, and now Windows 10 on ARM is, they're buying this computer and they think they're buying a computer. And then they get it home and they won't run the app that they want. And they're like, what the hell is this thing?
Yeah.
So Apple, they're going to handle that part of it better.
So I would, if I were to say what they need to do, like we discussed, bring back the MacBook. That is your entry. And you know why? Yeah. And I'm going to tell you why. As a marketer, right? Because that's what I am. I'm a technology enthusiast, but I'm a marketer more than anything else. I do business strategy and marketing, and that's why Paul keeps me around. He constantly asks me, how do I market this haircut? What do I do with my looks?
Yes,
I dress him up in a blue shirt, and I tell him, listen, that's your look. That's your brand.
This is all you got, buddy. You got to go with it.
But if I'm going to market this, I would stay far away from the Pro line. I would introduce the MacBook, return them, because I'll tell you why. That butterfly keyboard is gone, right?
Right.
They've updated the keyboard, so great. Now you got the new keyboard that everybody hated. That's gone.
Andrew,
you're going to add...
something to think about.
Go ahead.
Remember, Apple just released a rev to the 13-inch MacBook Pro line that has that butterfly keyboard with the 10th gen chips. But it didn't go to 14 inches. Like the 15 went to 16. They filled that space. On the 13, they kept the same exact form factor. They kept the same bezels, and they didn't bump it up. And everyone was like, why would they do that? And the rumors were, they are going to make that transition. That's going to come next year. What if that's one of the ways that they get people to go ARM is that will be the 14-inch version?
And I'm going to tell you,
the ARM chip.
I would immediately recommend buying that.
Right? Well, that gets interesting. I mean, because now the 13-inch, not only is it running Intel, which is probably performing better and whatever, but it looks less modern. Maybe with the iMac, we knew that a new design iMac was coming this fall. What if that's the one that's ARM, and then they keep the existing design for the Intel? And that's one of the ways they kind of grease the skids to get.
They're going to have to
people. I'm just again, we can only speculate. We might as well, but I mean that's it's one possibility.
Yeah, no, I think that is the way to do it, honestly. But you're going to have more than just ARM, right? Like the big selling point here, other than the aesthetic change to the device, like you're recommending, and I think that I didn't even think of that. Having a 14-inch MacBook Pro with the ARM-based chipset would be the selling point of that, because I got to tell you, that 13-inch and the 16-inch, the 16-inch is way too big, and the 13-inch is just a tad small. You need that sweet spot. This is the way to do it.
Yeah. By the way, if they had released a 14-inch, I probably would have splurged already and bought it. That is what I would have bought.
The reason
the MacBook Pro makes it hard.
Intel. with Intel as well.
Yeah, because look at the choices today. First of all, it's 13-inch. Like, why didn't they just make it bigger? But then you have like the cheap one, the relatively cheap one is like 8th gen 2 ports, and you have to spend like $17.99 to get 4 ports in the new chipset, and it still has a 13-inch display. And it's like, guys, what are you doing? So, spend less than $1,000 to get a MacBook Air. Who cares? But I mean, I would have spent more if they had made it make sense.
Yeah. Well, listen, even a 15-inch in its current form factor with thinner bezels, that's a decent size too. But unfortunately, there is no 15-inch MacBook Pro anymore.
Right.
They actually went big. People don't realize that the new 16-inch one is much larger. It's thicker and it's way heavier than this behemoth of a laptop.
Sure. I'm surprised you can lift that with the one hand. Have you been working out?
I have actually. Yeah. I've been doing push-ups. That's the only way I could carry this thing.
I've been doing MacBook lifts.
I just curl 16-inch MacBook Pros all day.
I just like sit there and lift it.
Yeah. That's the only way you could hold this thing. But we gotta. If you really look at it this way, why would I want to buy this? Obviously, they're gonna talk about that battery life till no end.
Yeah.
Best battery life in class.
I'm surprised they didn't raise the battery life issue. Not because they could have said some number that makes sense, but one of the things we have, one of the actual benefits of Windows 10 on ARM is until they've moved to those more recent chips, they were able to say, hey, look, this thing gets like 20, 25 hours of battery life. Now that's not true of the really customized versions anymore, but this, battery life is still one of those things. I mean, it seems like something they could have marketed.
Yeah. I mean, did they discuss what they're going to do with the GPU?
No, and so the A series chipset has, like all ARM chips, right? Has some kind of a GPU built in or attached to it on the SoC. So, what they did say was family of products. So, I think we're going to see a range of that stuff. And again, we have to speculate. So, MacBook Air probably will get the same. God, the MacBook Air will probably get the same chips that the iPad has, right? The iPad Pro and the entry-level MacBook Pro might have the same chipset. And then, for the upper-level devices, they're going to have to go super customized, more GPU, more CPU, et cetera. So who knows, but it's going to be something like that.
Well, listen, we know that they're going to be 8-core processors, at least. We know that. Right? Because
what about multiprocessor? Didn't we raise that issue before? I mean, if MacBook Pro, I mean, a 16-inch MacBook Pro running this thing. I mean, why not have 2 of them? I don't know. Maybe that might not make sense in the ARM world. I have no idea, but we'll see. There was that Spectrum, and they clearly landed right on the far right of it, and so they're going whole hog into this, and that's really interesting. I mean, it's just really interesting. So we'll see what that looks like.
So for people who don't have a Mac, the way that they work now, let's say you get a MacBook Pro, right? It obviously has the built-in Intel graphics, right? Whatever, the 645, right? That would be the Intel built-in.
Oh, the Iris Pro or whatever.
The Iris Pro, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But you also
Iris
have
Plus, whatever it is,
a secondary GPU. So the way that mine works on my MacBook Pro, my 15, 16-inch model, when you have, so when it's unplugged from charge, you're running on the Intel, defaults to the Intel chipset, the Intel GPU, so you're saving on the battery life. However, if you're plugged in and the application is tuned for this, it's running an AMD Radeon. So,
right.
I'm curious.
There's going to be something. Yeah, there'll be something. There'll be some, it may not, maybe we don't see it this November, but there's going to be some external GPU out. There has to be for it to compete. There has to be. We also, I mean, look, we've seen ARM chips in servers, like in data centers. We don't really see ARM chips in desktop class computers, and we certainly haven't seen ARM chips in systems that have expansion boards, right? So this is like kind of all new territory. And you think about something like a Mac Pro, which is essentially a tower type computer. What is that going to look like?
The Mac Pro?
That'll be one of the last ones to go, right?
Can they charge $6,000 for a Mac Pro now?
I don't know.
I don't. This is ARM-based processor.
I mean, we literally have no idea how they're going to do this.
Yeah, I don't know.
It may not be possible. I mean, at some point, I mean, Yeah, I mean, we'll see. You could almost imagine them saying, "Look, for for our workstation class products, we have to continue using because don't they have like Xeon options or something? Like these are super high end computers, right?"
Bruce in our chat room said,
Um,
let's see, 32 core Apple Silicon MacBook Pro or 64 core Apple Silicon?
I don't, you know,
I mean, that's what they're going to have to do.
look. I mean, honestly, maybe that stuff is less interesting anyway. I think what most people are looking for is MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, iMac, whatever. We'll see.
Listen, it's going to be a fascinating transition because it relies a lot on the software side also. So the virtualization is an interesting aspect to this because that's really going to be the key. Obviously, on the Windows side, they've improved it tremendously, right? Emulation, hardware-wise, software-wise, has been a tremendous improvement for ARM, but
Right.
it's still not great. So here's one of my questions. If you're running parallel, can
Yeah.
you still run Windows on this machine?
Yes. So
How good is
yeah,
it going to
how
run?
you got to
How?
remember. Parallels used to be available on the Power PC Mac. There were things like was it called Virtual PC? Whatever the ConnectX product. Well, I guess it was Virtual PC. VMware, etc. The performance was not great, but remember the point of that at the time was you wanted to run those apps. It was about getting Windows apps on the box, and it was better than nothing. I think the big difference between today and back then is most Mac users don't need those apps anymore. And the instances in which you're going to run Windows in virtualization or need to dual boot using Boot Camp are, if not zero, are much closer to zero. So I think it was very telling, by the way, that they showed running Linux in a virtual machine, because that's frankly the more typical scenario, and it's very developer oriented. This is not something like a business user would need or an individual. It's for developers. It's the reason Microsoft put Windows Subsystem for Linux in Windows 10. It's so you can run Linux in a very light VM with great performance and access that developer workflow, all the tools that you need on Linux without having to use two different computers. I think on the Mac, it's kind of the same deal, basically. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't expect to see Boot Camp on the system. I don't see the point of it. If you had to run Windows, yes, it will work. Again, the performance is an open question at this point, just like everything else. But they're saying they're going to make it work.
That's what they're saying. What do you think the battery life's going to be? Come on, Paul. Give me your guess. Let's do this.
Well, what's the battery life today? So in other words, if you have a MacBook Air today, what's the real life battery life on that system?
Which one are we going to go with? 13-inch MacBook Pro?
Yeah, sure.
All right, let's do realistically. 13-inch MacBook Pro battery life. What do they claim? 10 hours and 39 minutes. This is a 2019. Yeah, so that's what they're claiming.
So for this thing to in any way deliver real world performance that meets or exceeds that system, the battery life it's not going to be over 20 hours. Like, it can't. If it's an improvement at all, that's fine, but it has to also offer the same performance. And again, this requires a lot of speculation, but what we've seen on like the Microsoft 8, what's it called? SQ1 chip, which they worked on with Qualcomm, or the Qualcomm 8CX chip, battery life is not north of 20 hours, right? And so I think what you're going to see is tiered battery life numbers on the Mac. You're going to see above 10 hours, and we'll say it's 12 to 15, whatever it is. But that's going to be for all non-emulated apps, right? So if you're running just native ARM apps, all the stuff built into the operating system and apps that have been recompiled by their developers, so they run natively on Apple Silicon or ARM, it will be better. That's my guess. Yeah. But I think once you throw in Photoshop Elements, the Intel version, or what as we'll call it now, or God, so many apps on the Mac,
so
just like
Microsoft,
they're on Windows. I mean,
they showed Excel on that demo. So Microsoft has been working on getting this working.
Yeah. Right. So you notice too, right? One of the big blockers for macOS 10 when it first came out was that Adobe didn't port Photoshop immediately. And now, of course, Adobe is not just Photoshop; it's the entire CC suite. And one of the day one things they announced is Adobe is porting their entire CC suite over to this new system, and that's important because that would really hold back the platform, just like not having Office would hold back the platform somewhat. So yeah, I mean they're doing all the right moves.
Oh, I mean they gotta have everything on there. So you want to talk about the operating system itself?
You mean the Big Sur thing?
Yeah. So we'll go into this because obviously a lot of this is going to play into each other, right? The bigger thing here, obviously, we'll pull up the story and all the changes is iOS standard iOS changes. We'll talk about iOS. We'll talk about iOS 14 next. Let's skip the Mac. I'm gonna go to the Mac last.
Yeah. Okay.
No, you know what? Never mind. Let's go with the Mac now because it's gonna tie in. So they kind of showed. There's so much information here. I'm trying to
that's
follow
hard.
it. On the Mac software side, it's the end of OS 10. It's OS 11.
well, it's just Mac OS, right? I mean, they're just
Mac OS 11. The number.
No, but you don't do that because you're trying to ease the friction on this transition. So the idea here is that users don't have to think about it, right? So it's just Mac OS. They don't use the 10 anymore. The 10's gone, even though it's really there, right? So I think that's how they do it. It's just Mac OS, and that's a smart marketing wise. It's smart.
Yeah. iMessages app now has full featured like on the iPad and like in iOS. Did they say if they changed it over to if it's a brand new app that they rebuilt?
The Messages one?
Yeah.
I might have lost that because at the end they said that at least Maps was actually the like the iPad app, and it wouldn't surprise me if Messages was too. But I might have missed that. I think there was a list of apps that they said, hey, we showed you these things before. They're actually the iPad version.
Yeah.
The
so Mail app is true. Different. Yeah. We know that they changed the Mail app. So. It's not a tremendous changeover, but this is where everything changes now. As a developer, how much more inclined are you now to have your apps on the Mac platform? Because with Catalyst and everything that they did, it hasn't gripped like they thought it would. And I'm actually very surprised it didn't grip the way they had anticipated it to. The apps on the Mac right now that are brought over from iOS, not that great. And I use these. I use these apps.
I'm surprised by this too.
I don't know why they're not that great, but I'll give you a great example of this, right? I'm not talking about the in-house built apps, right? The ones that Apple built work perfectly fine. It's just a preference at this point, right? If you like it or not. But example, Twitter. The Twitter app on the Mac, which is ported over, right? They claim, this was a big part of them, that the Twitter app is coming back to Mac.
Right.
It is terrible. It is a terrible application.
Just use the PWA, guys. Come on.
It's a terrible application. You could see how much memory leak it has. I have a tool that I use on the Mac that I could see what's using more CPU, what's using more memory, and I could just see this after having this running. If I disconnect my laptop from charge and I let this battery drains immediately, and I've seen this happen with other apps that were brought over to the Mac from iOS. Right. They have to get this right first.
Yeah. Well, look, they are going to get it right. And aside from the fact that this stuff will run better because of the underlying architecture, it's kind of a gimme. That's good. Look, they're making look, this is the second year it's been available to third-party developers. There's going to be improvements. They talked about some of the stuff. There was, in fact, I think there might have been one of those all-on things where all the different features you're going to get. It was kind of hard to pay attention to because it went by so quick. But, the key for making most iPad apps run well on Mac OS is going to be that the developer takes the time to add the native features that make it make sense. And a lot of developers aren't going to do that. I mean, so the trick here is that the Mac is a relatively small user base compared to mobile. But on the other hand, it also gives you the option, depending on the app, to add features that are unique to the platform that make it more powerful on the Mac. And I think it was you and I think we had talked maybe about the possibility in the future with this change, and maybe there'll be a thing for WWDC 21 or whatever, is bringing Mac apps now that they can be recompiled for ARM down to iPad Pro, especially. That's really interesting.
I mean, why can't you have an option? I mean, you know what's the best potential?
First things first, right?
On the Mac, on the iPad, right? I'm not obviously this is not going to happen tomorrow, but essentially, you could run macOS. Why can't you have a desktop mode for the Pro user that it flips over to it?
Well, the other, okay, yes. I mean, first of all, yes. I mean, but the other thing is, Apple has been very adamant about not bringing touch to the Mac for some reason.
Do you do it now?
I think there are huge reasons to do that. But once you get Xcode on ARM, which is their developer environment, one of the advantages of having touch when you're developing apps is that you can touch them on the screen. It's actually a huge benefit. So on the Windows side, when we develop Windows apps or Android apps or whatever, we can touch the screen and move things around just like you do on the device. It's kind of a big deal. Imagine if you could use Xcode. Xcode would be a great example of a Mac app that needs to be on the iPad. Bringing that down to one iPad Pro, pretty high-end specs, keyboard, trackpad, whatever. Plug in your iPhone and make apps. That's a whole new world right there.
Listen, Jan in our chat room, great example. What if they did it with external monitor support on the Pros?
Yeah.
There's a lot. A lot is going to change. You brought up the touch aspect to the MacBooks.
Right.
And I'm going to give my kids as a great example, right? Mm-hmm. My kids have no concept of a laptop not being touch. Does not exist to them.
As it turns out, I also have no concept of this because literally just today, I brought out this HP laptop I forgot I had. And I'm like, oh, I should bring this, get this thing up to date. And I'm tapping this, like the top of it. I'm like, what's going on here? It doesn't have touch.
Yeah, they very interesting. Very interesting. So on the Mac side, obviously software wise, was there anything that stood out to you that they announced
on
the Mac OS?
No, I kind of goofed around about the new UI, lipstick on a pig, etc. But the truth is, modernizing and simplifying that OS, that UX, I should say, it makes sense. It's fine. And I know there are going to be like pro users grumbling, oh, they're dumbing it down like the iPad and whatever. And I think making the look and feel similar is a good idea. Yeah. I like the transparency stuff. I know they've always had that. Whatever, they're overemphasizing that again. I think it looks nice. So to me, that's the most of the stuff that's on a Mac I just don't care about. So
how about Safari, Paul?
Safari would be one of those things I couldn't care less about. So like, good for the, no, it's good. Like, I get it. They're going to do tracking protection. Well, they already do some form of tracking protection, whatever. So that's fine. And there were people that are going to want that, and it's good.
Yeah.
I just don't care about it personally, but
it's now time for iOS. Guys, before we continue, I want to remind everybody, if you enjoy this podcast, stay tuned. Right after we finish, we do What to Talk. Paul and I do an extra 20 minutes of bonus content that we release on Patreon. If you enjoy the show, you want to support us, you go to patreon.com/Mattman. Wrong show. Patreon.com/WhatToTech.
Wow.
Yeah, sorry, Paul. I've been doing that all day. I got a lot going on. Patreon.com/WhatToTech. You can go there as little as $1 per episode. You get access to our bonus content. Also, if you're watching live on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening anywhere else, you can subscribe to us. We're everywhere podcasts are available, and it helps us out when you do that. And also, hit like us. Hit the like button. Smash the like button. Is that what they say?
Ring the bell.
Ring the bell. Remember to ring the bell. iOS 14.
Ring the little red bell.
This was another one. A lot of changes here with widgets. Widgets are here. Where do you want to go with this?
I'm okay with all this stuff. The thing I still don't understand why you can't just put a freaking icon anywhere on the screen. Like, why? What is the holdup with this? Everything starts in the upper left, which, with most people are right-handed, and you're holding it in your right hand, and it is the furthest point on the screen. You can't reach it. You have to use it two-handed. So he's like, Craig Federini, one of the first things he says, I got all my favorite apps right there at the top. It's like, yeah, right where you can't reach them. Like what? One of the best things about Android is that you can array the icons anywhere you want on screen. And I do, and I hope most people do, is smart. You put them on the bottom. You leave the top is empty. You don't.
Yeah.
You can use it one-handed. It's just logical.
So all I could think of. So I'm trying to find. You know what's funny? I feel like everybody's half-assing this coverage. Nobody has like just simplified like usual. I think because people are running on such small teams right now. Everything's like all over the place. I'm trying to.
It was also blasted out really quick. I mean, a lot of the new features in each of these releases came out on a single slide that was on screen for like 3 seconds, and it was a bunch of words.
Yeah.
So I mean, for example, like one of the things that was in there, it might have been on the iPad side, but I assume it's on iOS and iPadOS, is you're going to be able to set your default email and browser apps for the first time. I mean, how innovative, but I mean, how important. Like, to me, that's right up there with putting icons where you want them on the screen. It's like obvious. It should have been there years ago. So it's stupid that it wasn't. I'm glad this is finally happening. I wish they would do more,
Yeah. So you're going to have obviously changes to messaging. You're going to have widgets now everywhere. I'm curious to see how people use this. I generally did not use it on Android as much as some other people. Like, I know people that's all they do is, I mean, every page that they're on with their apps, they have widgets on there. I just like the weather widget, and I like my email widget, and that was it. That's all I would use. So,
yeah, I mean, actually, that'd be a good way to fill up that space. I guess you could push the icons down by putting some big widgets up there.
Yeah. So they're gonna do that. What else is here? Paul, anything stand out? Siri,
well, first of all, just the ability to put widgets on the home pages, and to have resizable widgets. And I know, like, look, yeah, we had these things in Live Tiles. We have these things on Android, blah, 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 whatever. It's good. It's all good. Like, this is what should happen.
Yeah. So widgets, you're going to have Siri now does Google, includes a Google Translate like app, which I think that one's going to be very, like, I travel a lot, so that's very handy. I like that. That's a cool app. Obviously, you're going to have different grouping of conversations, all that. Apple Maps, update to Apple Maps. The CarPlay concept is fascinating to me on how long it takes automotive car manufacturers to implement this in their CarPlay. They showed a BMW, which is not a cheap BMW, and they were showing how your key now is shareable amongst, you could do restricted access, which is going to be great for teenage drivers. You're going to be able to give a key for like a day or two. Very cool. I like that. That's different. It's a nice little addition. Anything else I'm missing here? Any big parts of this?
I spent the entire event waiting for the Mac thing, which, I mean, whatever. I mean, I will say there was less going on the iPad side than I thought there was going to be. It was mostly like, hey, we're going to pick up all the stuff from iOS, like, of course you are. I thought, given that they actually split out iPadOS, they have these pro devices now with keyboards and trackpads. I thought, there'd be bigger gains on the iPadOS side.
I thought so too. I thought they would have, the last 2 years they made big gains. They made it feel more like an operating system. Obviously, trackpad support now, and
a lot of it's the multitasking stuff and side-by-side apps and all this kind of stuff. And there was nothing on that. There was nothing, and I thought that was kind of interesting. But whatever. It's okay. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. The one thing that stood out to me, and I tweeted about this as a joke, and I got a message from somebody that he doesn't follow me. I guess he was just following the hashtag. My tweet was that the ability to hide pages where your apps are, right?
Yes.
That is going to be a nightmare. And I'm going to explain to you why. And I tweeted that the Genius Bar is going to have a lot of overtime with people waiting in line saying, oh, my apps are gone. My apps are gone. And they disabled it somehow. And that was my tweet. And this guy wrote to me and he goes, I just saw this. And I said, OS. Because he's a genius, right? An Apple genius.
Right.
And he goes, I didn't even consider how many people are going to come for that stupid thing, which is a possibility. Listen, I've been to the Apple Store many times and I've seen the crazy stuff people go in there for because it's available and that you can. This is going to be
Yeah,
a problem with people hiding their apps and not understanding how this works.
right. This is what happens when you don't have an all apps list, right? Like every
Yeah.
other OS on earth.
Yeah.
And you make everyone put everything on the home screens, and they expand and expand and expand. And then you're like, okay, hold on. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to add folders, right? Now you can hide stuff in folders. It's like, great. But I don't really want the folder on the screen. See, the thing is, the home screen is like where the shortcuts are for the apps I want to run. Like, why can't my infrequently used apps just be somewhere else? And Apple's like, they can't be somewhere else because we're Apple. How about if we let you hide them? It's like, guys, Jesus, like just I don't know, whatever. They're unique. They're little
Yeah,
they're the
well,
snowflake company.
I'm curious how much of an issue they have here.
I know.
Listen, man, this was they stuck strictly to development. They did not unveil any hardware. I know a lot of people were
Right.
thinking
I
they
did
were
that
gonna get a
doesn't
hardware
surprise me.
announcement.
I will say, by the way, on that point, sorry, that
No, go ahead.
one of the weird, and this is not unique to Apple, to be honest, but it is kind of a weird thing. I think this every year. They talk about all these great iOS features, and then you want to see like a new iPhone, or they talk about all these iPad OS features, like, all right, so let's, show us a new iPad. And it's like, that's not part of it. The watch was like that. Updating features on watch OS to me is not particularly interesting. If there was an exciting new watch coming that they could do the demo on, see, I think that might have gotten more people excited about that stuff.
Yeah.
I know they have their own release schedule, whatever, but.
So what was the big update with tvOS? Because I stepped away. I had to step away when they were going over tvOS. Anything?
Home app has gone it. No, it was minor. That was the tvOS stuff was pretty minor.
Nothing really. I'm just trying to, and then watchOS had small changes to it, but
sleep tracking, like eliminating. Oh no, there it is. I'm sorry, that was. Oh no, did they add sleep tracking? I think they did. Did they?
They added more.
I zoned out during this.
Yeah, through the Apple Watch stuff. The guy that's never lifted a weight talking about it.
He's like in a gym. Like they had to make it virtual because it's clear this guy would never step in a gym.
Yeah,
but by the way, give him credit. Kevin is his first name because that woman he cut to was doing like all these dance moves, and I was like, pretty good for her.
She's able to do it. Good for her.
Yeah, no, she looked great. And then they switched back to him, and he did like one as well. And I thought that was cute. That was good. Good for him.
Yeah, this is we are now. We spoke about this last week. I mean, we spoke about this for a long time where Apple's peak to a lot of people was around 2012, 2011 when they unveiled the MacBook, the iPad 2, and they were just really in high gear with,
Yep.
Not I guess you would say revolutionary products. I think the iPad was a revolutionary product. That they created an entire market for tablets, and they were the only ones that were able to do it. We're now in another transitionary period where if this ARM concept, obviously they're going to be able to do it, right? If anybody could do ARM on a PC or ARM on a laptop, it would be Apple because they control the software, they control the hardware, and they're able to kind of bridge this gap. Where does the PC industry now go? Because you have seen on the phone side, they followed Apple. On the tablet side, they attempted to follow Apple. It did not work. And now we're on the laptop side where are we going to see more and more ARM-based devices?
First of all, the world is very different today, right? So there was a lot of Apple envy during the whole iPod, iPhone, and then I guess iPad maybe, but that whole time frame. Today, Apple is really just a fast follower, and actually they're a slow follower. So, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, and that's fine. I mean, the truth is, Apple, when they were moving quickly like they were at the time, was a smaller company and was a minority player in the industry. Today, they are dominant. They have a humongous audience. And now it makes sense for them to move in a more measured way. And I think it makes sense. Like one of the most striking things to me about this Mac transition is just the mature way in which they're going out and doing it. Microsoft and its partners released stuff that didn't work, that worked slow, that was crappy, and it was poorly received and no one bought it. And then they did a second gen that was crappy and was poorly received and no one bought it. And then they did a third version that was a little less crappy, but no one had bought it. And is that really is that a smart strategy? Apple sat on this stuff until it was ready to go. And you can kind of make fun of, like, they never, they always wait, they're always slow, whatever. But you know what? The result is something that's going to work. And you have to respect that. You have to respect it. Apple, we'll see. They've always been very aggressive about getting rid of old technology. It's going to be fascinating to see them do it to something as important to the Mac product line as like Intel processors. It's crazy. But they don't take that step until it's ready. If Apple released products like Microsoft did, they would be ridiculed endlessly. Microsoft releases these stupid ARM things that nobody can use and nobody wants, and nobody even notices, except for the enthusiast guys. I mean, it's, I don't know. I look, there's a lot of hubris and stuff I don't like about Apple, but I have to respect the way they're doing this. And so you were talking about, like, that exciting period. Absolutely. But, one of the ways you can bring some excitement back to a product, like especially a legacy product like the Mac, you want to inject a little excitement into it. Let's do a platform transition. Suddenly the next 2 years look pretty interesting, don't they?
Yeah.
Because there's going to be a lot of stuff going on along the side of it too. So
listen, I think this is the end of, honestly, something that has not been discussed is I believe this is the end of the way that we see Mac OS, the UI of Mac OS. This is the beginning of the transition.
Yeah.
Because this only leads to other things. Now you incorporate touch, which they're going to have to.
So I don't remember when this was, but a million years ago, I don't know, at some point, they brought like the what was essentially the iPhone home screen to the Mac. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
There was an alternate launcher you could use that was like a row of icons. It was the stupidest freaking thing in the world.
You're talking about
no, this is the literal icons. It was dumb. It's probably still in there somewhere. It has whatever the name is. I don't remember, but bringing the look and like the general look and feel.
Launchpad.
Yeah, whatever. It was stupid. So, but making your products look and feel more like each other, I actually think kind of makes sense. Like, one of the things that I think is a little awkward on the watch, and I know some of it is just driven by the form factor, is that it doesn't really resemble the other platforms. And the app, which they're renaming to Fitness, but whatever that Apple Watch app was, with the weird colored rings and everything, it's like this UI that only exists in this one place. And I always felt like it was kind of out of place. So I honestly, on the Mac, I think that new UI, that kind of, it's not really new, but refreshed, it's like literally a can of paint. You walk around and fix everything up. I think it looks great. I think it looks modern.
Yeah.
I think it's nice. Like Mac or Apple users are going to want that.
Yeah. Well, listen, one thing that the big advantage Apple has here is that they don't really have to stick to legacy because they don't have the market share that Microsoft does. A lot of the issues with Microsoft, and we talk about it all the time.
Yeah, but you know what?
The fact that they got to support everything.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I kind of stepped around this earlier. Let me be a little clearer about this, because this is something I don't feel has been properly enunciated or said or whatever. Is Microsoft wants to make this transition too, right? They want to do what Apple's doing. They can't. So they're taking baby steps like they always do. They're working with partners. They're not just working with Intel on special chips. They're working with AMD on special chips and with Qualcomm on special chips. God help us, there'll probably be a fourth company someday soon. They can't take this step and say, we need to get here, because they're so reliant on their partners. The real reason that Microsoft went to ARM years ago was because of Intel. They couldn't stand that this company was dominant and wasn't moving quickly enough to adopt the mobile technologies that would allow their products to run thin, light, fanless, epic battery life, constant connectivity. Mm-hmm. Intel's always been focused on the high end of, the performance end of the spectrum. And they're like, no, the future of these devices is smaller, lighter, et cetera. And so that's how that all kind of came about. But they don't have I don't know if it's intestinal fortitude or just their ability, because they rely so much on their partners. They can't do what Apple is doing. It has to be really frustrating.
Listen, the MacBook Air is what, $899 starting? $999 starting, right? $999.
Yeah. 850 in refurbished store.
Refurbish 850. What if they say, you know what? Let's try something different.
Yeah.
They introduce a $699 MacBook.
I know.
What happens to the market then?
By the way, see,
you just
yeah,
introduced the Mac to people that were
exactly.
up until this moment out of your price range.
Exactly. By the way, they did that. So remember, the iPad surged back
when they dropped the price.
I was like, sorry, it sounded like my son was bouncing a basketball above my head. I thought the roof was going to come in. Yes. So listen, look, I am not predicting some kind of a Mac surge or anything like that, but I will say we're in a weird spot right now where Microsoft is really pissing off their users in Windows 10 with updates that don't work properly, with updates that come too frequently, with inbox advertising and crapware. It's like they're baiting us to leave. Yeah. And if Apple saw with the iPad when they lowered the price, oh my God, it takes off. They saw this with the iPhone SE.
And not only did it
lower
take
the price,
off,
oh my God,
Paul, it was the sales were just plateaued. They just sat there.
Oh yeah, no, they
dropped that price.
It was worse than that. They had gone down for like 6 years. So yeah, a viable Mac in the mid to high hundreds would change a lot of people's mind, because people sort of understand, like, we're going to pay a little more for this. But if you could sell one in that price range, they would get switchers. And that's something Apple has not talked about in a decade or more. Like, Mac switchers has just not been a thing. But the market is ripe. And listen, I want to be clear. I am not predicting that's going to happen. I'm not, but
very interesting if it does, because that's an industry disruptor as far as.
Or you're sending a kid to school,
Yeah.
That makes the Mac much more approachable. It's very interesting.
And here's your argument never to go touchscreen, right? You want a touchscreen device, you get an iPad. You want to get a Mac?
Yeah.
Here you go.
Well, that's by the way, that's literally the strategy. They want you to buy an iPad and an iPhone and a Mac and a watch. That's the strategy.
You're tied
and then you subscribe to all the services.
That's what it is. You're tied in.
By the way, whatever, they're a company. They're not a charity. There's nothing wrong with that.
You're looking at how many iPhones are out in the public right now?
Close to 1 billion. It was the last time they said a number. I think it was 900 something million. Yeah.
The hardest part is introducing someone the environment, the ecosystem that you've created.
Yeah, but you know what? If it looks like the hype, in other words, you have you have an iPhone, right? Because 50% of Americans have an iPhone, or you have an iPad and an iPhone. A lot of people do that. And now you're going to make the Mac simpler and have it look like that stuff and run the same apps. It gets really interesting. I'm just saying, like, that is where you would that's where you get people into the fold. It can't cost $2,000.
It's not a tablet. It's not a tablet. If you want touchscreen, you still go with an iPad. You could go from, if you want a Pro, you're going to spend $1,200 to get the highest end one. But if you want an introductory, if you want a device for your kid going to college, or you want a device for your kid in high school, and you don't want to get a MacBook Pro or spend, $1,100, $1,200, $799. By the way, again, we're playing a game here, right? We're fan fiction. We're saying, how would this change? A $799 Mac to introduce you to the Mac platform. You're in there. You're locked. You're locked in. You're not leaving after that.
Yep. Yeah.
You have an iPhone. You have an iPad. Now you have a Mac. You're not going back to PC. You're not going to Android. The odds of you doing that, every device that you are using that is part of one.
Oh yeah. No. By the way, as long as you multiply the number of Apple devices you have, the chances of you switching platforms go down astronomically, because the switching costs at that point become truly difficult. Yep. No. And the benefits of having multiple devices. So you're working on a Mac, and you can handle your messages from that computer. Huge.
Yeah.
The cross-platform benefits that they only give themselves are real-world benefits for people. So yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah. They did have a AirPod announcement too, which it was. So you know what I found fascinating? So they had that AirPod announcement, right? But they did not talk about new hardware.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, a lot of this stuff should have been, because it's coming to existing devices, it will be a firmware update.
I would have waited. I would have been like, hey, by the way, guys.
I know, that's my point. That's what I mean. I think for stuff, I forgot about the AirPod part of it, but I feel that way about the TV stuff, about the watch stuff. If it's weird having it disconnected from new hardware, because one of the cool things you can do when you introduce that stuff is say, oh, and it's coming to the existing devices do. And then existing customers don't feel left out. But whatever, they have their own schedule.
Yeah. It was a fascinating announcement. You know what? I would not mind it if they did this every year. This is the new announcement now. This is how you do it.
Except they love to be in front of a friendly audience and get cheering,
Yeah. So we'll see. Mixer. You want to talk about Mixer before we go into what to talk?
No.
Mixer's dead.
Mixer was a failure. It was always a failure. They gave it the old college try. They paid a couple of streamers a lot of money. That money is now lost, and it didn't work. So that's it. That one's tough because they make one of the big gaming platforms, and they should have been able to make it work. And honestly, Mixer was pretty good, but nobody used it.
Nobody used it. Yeah. So they're teaming up with Facebook.
Great. There's
another great platform,
trustworthy brand for you to turn to. Thanks,
another
Microsoft.
Great platform for them to do.
Yep.
Overall, I think this was I like this announcement by Apple. If we're going to summarize this, I'm curious to see where we go when we push forward with this.
Right.
I'm curious to see how some of the applications, obviously, we're not going to go into everything. Like the Photos app is different. It's interesting because a couple years ago, that Photos app was so important to update when they left the iLife suite, when they went from
and that stuff is
iPhotos
so...
to the Photos app. And it was interesting. Well, you know what? I'm going to tell you, a lot of people cared then. I think now you.
No, I mean now. Who cares now? Like it's
now,
like iWork was completely. Who cares? Whatever. Okay, good.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens.
Yep.
A lot of transition and a lot of changes coming. We'll get some more information in the coming weeks, obviously, as people install the software, the developer software, as developers get hardware. I'm dying to see how this thing performs. I really am. In the real world, obviously the 12Z is the processor that they're shipping with. You know what's interesting? I guess it is not shipping with its own GPU, huh? Just the one that's built in. It won't have like a separate GPU.
Right. That's why this is fascinating, because this is literally the chip they put in an iPad. So now we're going to have something to compare it to.
Yeah.
We'll see. I bet it's not as fast. I'm just saying, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
We'll find out. Guys, if you enjoy the show, thank you so much. You could hit the subscribe button. Join us each and every week. We do the show. Quick 1 hour podcast on technology. I always describe this as guys hanging out at the bar talking about tech. That's how I see it.
Right.
If you're watching this, stay tuned. Don't leave. We're going to do what to talk next. We'll continue this discussion.
Don't leave yet. It's last call.
Yeah, it's last call. You don't have to go. You can finish your drink.
You don't have to go home. You just can't stay here.
Just can't stay here. By the way, bars are open here in New York today.
Yeah, how do you feel about going to a bar today?
I was contemplating leaving today and going to the bar.
Really?
I was contemplating going to a bar. It's outside. Outdoor dining is in.
Okay.
But
okay. Yeah.
I envision it's going to be a freaking zoo tonight when everybody's getting home from work. So I anticipate it being too wild, and I'm staying home.
We waited
amateur hour.
2 weeks when we hit that phase before we even tried eating outdoors at a restaurant. And so we did do that last weekend. But
nice.
I feel a little safer here than I would in New York. No offense, but
that's my town. My town wasn't really as affected as other places here. But
okay, sure.
We're chugging along, guys. We're hanging on. All things Paul, go to therot.com, my source for all the tech news that we cover here. That's the first place that I go, therot.com. You can follow me at Andrew Zarian. Give me a follow, guys. You can follow Paul at Therot on Twitter. Remember, hit the subscribe button to us here on YouTube and everywhere else on podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. By the way, we're staying here. We're going to do What to Talk now. If you listen to the podcast, go and check out What to Talk. I promise this will be an okay What to Talk. Not the best, not the worst, just an okay.
I like setting expectations.
Yeah.
This is not going to be the best one we've ever done.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
We'll
see where it goes. We'll find out. Until next time, guys.
It's probably not going to suck.
Take care.